Have you ever been made to feel invisible in a place you earned the right to be? That's what happened to Tamika Allen in Seat 2B. The flight attendant, Brenda, had just told her the seared salmon she pre-ordered a week ago was gone. The only option? A cold chicken wrap. Then Brenda turned to the white businessman beside her. "For our platinum flyers," she chirped, "we have a special filet mignon." The lie was so bold, so publicly cruel, that the tremor in Tamika's hand wasn't rage. It was the hum of a silent engine turning over. The first-class cabin went still. Conversations froze mid-sentence. The air grew thick with awkward silence. In a space built for comfort, the insult cut sharper than turbulence. Before we continue, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches you, make sure you subscribe because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. This flight was supposed to be a victory lap. Tamika Allen, CEO, strategist, storm in heels, had boarded Apex Air with quiet pride. Her bright yellow suit wasn't fashion, it was armor, a declaration that she belonged here, in 2B, surrounded by the kind of people who once doubted she ever could. Back in the Birmingham terminal, her shaved head had drawn its usual stares, the kind that tried to strip power from her before she even spoke. She'd ignored them like she always did, because today, she'd earned her peace. Today was supposed to be a clean breath after years of fighting for her name to mean something. But peace, it seemed, had been denied boarding. Brenda was the gatekeeper of this airborne kingdom. Polished smile, corporate poise, and eyes colder than the cabin air. From the moment Tamika stepped aboard, the woman's attention was selective, strategic, weaponized. She'd glided past Tamika as if she were luggage, her gaze locking instead on the man in 2C, Mr. Peterson, all silver cufflinks and entitlement. "Would you care for champagne before takeoff, Mr. Peterson?" she paired, her laugh light and practiced. Then, finally turning to Tamika, the warmth drained from her face, leaving only efficiency. "Yes." Tamika met her eyes evenly. "I believe I pre-ordered the seared salmon." Her tone was calm, controlled, the kind of tone that told people she was used to being heard. But Brenda didn't even check her manifest. Didn't blink. "Sorry," she said flatly. "We out of the salmon today. Just the cold chicken wrap left." The words hung in the air like a slap. No apology. No respect. Just dismissal. Then, before Tamika could even respond, Brenda turned back to Mr. Peterson, her entire demeanor transforming in an instant. "Mr. Peterson," she beamed, "our chef prepared a filet mignon with a truffle reduction, a special for our platinum flyers. Would you prefer that instead?" The whiplash of contrast was staggering. Luxury for one, leftovers for the other. Tamika didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched as the cabin's atmosphere tightened around her. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman in pearls looked down at her tablet. A man cleared his throat, pretending to scroll through his phone. They all knew what had just happened, but silence was easier than courage. For Tamika, the message was clear. You don't belong here. Not really. The humiliation crawled beneath her skin, hot and electric, but the heat didn't rise to her face. It cooled. It condensed into something sharper, the kind of calm that only arrives right before a storm. Brenda smiled her fake smile again, satisfied. She thought the hierarchy had been restored. But Tamika's stillness wasn't surrender. It was precision. She drew a slow breath, every inch of her posture composed. Then she looked Brenda directly in the eye, unblinking, unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made the air itself lean closer. "Perhaps," she said, each word deliberate, "you could just double-check your manifest." The words were soft, but the silence that followed was deafening. The deafening silence wasn't empty. It was full of the unspoken tension that had been building since Tamika boarded. Every passenger in the first-class cabin, whether they were pretending to read their tablets or staring blankly out the window, was now the audience to a one-act play they hadn't bought tickets for. The clinking of ice in glasses stopped. The rustle of magazines froze. All eyes, for a brief, electric moment, were on Brenda. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a defendant, and Tamika's quiet, reasonable question was the accusation. For a split second, Brenda's corporate smile faltered. A flicker of genuine insult flashed in her eyes. It was the look of a petty monarch whose divine right had just been questioned by a commoner. Who was this woman in the loud yellow suit to challenge her word? To undermine her authority in front of her cabin? Brenda's training kicked in, a shield of practice poise snapping back into place, but her jaw tightened. She drew herself up to her full height, a condescending sigh escaping her lips. It was a sound designed to be heard, a performance of weary patience for the other passengers. She didn't even glance at her tablet. She simply tilted her head. She said, her voice dripping with the kind of false politeness that is sharper than any insult. With all due respect, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know my inventory. It's an operational necessity that we keep an accurate count of our catering, and I can assure you, with complete certainty, there is no salmon. The corporate jargon was a weapon. Operational necessity. Complete certainty. Meaningless phrases meant to end conversations, to assert a power that couldn't be questioned. This wasn't about salmon anymore. It was never about the salmon. It was about being seen, being heard, and being deliberately, publicly dismissed. It's a quiet violence that cuts deeper than any shout, the feeling of your own reality being denied right to your face. Tamika's gaze drifted for a moment, scanning the other faces. The woman in pearls was now intensely focused on her knitting. Mr. Peterson, the man who was about to receive a filet mignon, cleared his throat and took a sudden, deep interest in the safety manual. They heard it, they saw it, and they did nothing. Their silence was a verdict. The system wasn't just Brenda. It was every person who chose their own comfort over someone else's dignity. In that moment, the last glimmer of hope for a simple resolution died. The patient, reasonable woman who boarded the plane in Birmingham was gone, and the woman who had brought a corporate giant to its knees just hours before was now fully present. The calm in Tamika's eyes wasn't patience anymore. It was something colder. It was the chilling stillness of a battle plan locking into place. Brenda thought she was dismissing a complaint. She had no idea she was triggering a command. She gave a final, tight smile and turned to walk away, confident that the matter was closed. She believed she had put the woman in the yellow suit back in her place. But she never saw the look on Tamika's face as her hand, now perfectly steady, slipped into her purse. She wasn't reaching for a wallet to buy a tasteless wrap. She was reaching for her phone, and she wasn't about to open an app to file a complaint. She was about to open a war. The click of Tamika's purse latch was a tiny, sharp sound in the tense cabin, as final as a gavel striking wood. Brenda, now leaning conspiratorially toward Mr. Peterson's seat, didn't hear it. She was lost in her performance, her voice a low, reverent murmur as she described the filet mignon. The chef insists on a 28-day dry-aging process, she whispered, as if sharing a state secret. And the truffle reduction is flown in from Italy. Just for our most discerning guests, of course. She laughed, a light, airy sound designed to create an exclusive club of two. She was building a world around his seat, a world of privilege and special treatment, completely oblivious to the fact that her own world was about to be dismantled from a few feet away. Tamika's movements were fluid, economical, and devoid of any wasted energy. She retrieved her phone, a sleek, unadorned black slab. In this moment, it was not a communication device. It was a scepter. The tremor that had once touched her hand was gone, replaced by a chilling stillness. This was not the trembling of a victim. It was the focus of a predator. Her phone illuminated her face with a cool, blue-white light as her thumb moved across the screen. She bypassed the familiar, colorful icons of social media, email, and the useless Apex A app with its smiling, 5-star rating system. A complaint is a plea. It's a request for the very system that failed you to police itself. It's an entry into a bureaucratic maze of reference numbers and automated replies, a process designed to absorb anger and exhaust dissent into submission. It is an act of faith in a structure that has already proven itself faithless. Tamika Allen did not deal in faith. She dealt in consequences. Her thumb stopped on a simple, dark gray icon with no name, just a secure emblem. An encrypted messaging app. The kind of app used for conversations that could topple markets or seal billion-dollar deals. It opened to a stark, minimalist interface. A list of contacts appeared, but she didn't need to scroll. There was only one name pinned to the top, DM. Two simple initials that carried more weight than the entire corporate hierarchy of Apex Air. Her fingers, which had signed the deal of a lifetime just hours before, now moved with that same chilling precision. They didn't type a paragraph. They didn't write an angry tirade filled with exclamation points. They typed a single, cold, surgical sentence. The taps of a thumbnail on the glass were the only sound, quiet and rhythmic. The camera of the world seemed to zoom in on her eyes. The hot flash of humiliation she'd felt minutes ago had been forged into something else entirely. It was the ice-cold resolve of a CEO who didn't ask for things, but acquired them. The woman Brenda saw was a problem to be managed. The woman looking at the phone screen was a force of nature about to make landfall. She gave the sentence one final, steely-eyed read. Then, with a quiet finality that sealed the fate of every crew member on that flight, she pressed send. Have you ever wondered what real power looks like? It's not the performative authority of a uniform or a title. It's not Brenda's temporary reign over her small, pressurized kingdom. Real power is quiet. It is invisible. It's a single sentence, typed at 30,000 feet, that can unravel a corporation from the inside out. Who was she messaging? It wasn't a customer service agent or a complaints department manager. The answer would ground more than just this flight. It would shatter the chain of command for the entire airline. The small blue message bubble appeared on her screen. Beneath it, 2 check marks and a single, silent word confirmed its arrival. Delivered. Hundreds of miles away, in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Chicago skyline, a phone vibrated on a polished mahogany desk. It was the only phone that had been allowed to remain on during the most critical merger meeting in Apex Air's 10-year history. And the man who just picked it up wasn't in customer service. He was the CEO. The vibration was a low, insistent hum against the polished mahogany. In the sterile quiet of the Apex Air boardroom, 30 floors above the Chicago hum, it was the only thing that seemed out of place. The CEO, a man whose tailored suit cost more than a car, glanced down at his phone with a flicker of annoyance. His top executive was mid-sentence, pointing to a slide that detailed the final, multi-billion-dollar terms of a merger that would define his legacy. Nothing was supposed to interrupt this moment. He read the single sentence on his screen, and the world stopped. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask of horror. His knuckles went white as he gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. The billion-dollar figures on the screen behind him blurred into meaningless static. A quiet gasp escaped his lips, audible enough to make his executive trail off, confused. The entire room of powerful men turned to look at him, their own confident expressions dissolving into concern. They saw a man who looked like he'd just seen the ghost of the company's future, and it was a funeral. What could one sentence do? What could it possibly say to provoke that kind of reaction? That's the question they were all asking themselves. Who was the woman in the yellow suit? The CEO didn't just see a passenger's name in the message. He saw a name that was currently attached to his airline's single largest corporate travel account. A name that belonged to the CEO of the firm that held a terrifying amount of their corporate debt. A name that, with a single phone call, could gut Apex Air's stock price before the market closed. Meanwhile, at 30,000 feet, Brenda was laughing. She placed a flute of champagne on Mr. Peterson's tray with a flourish, completely unaware that a silent, digital shockwave was racing from seat 2B to the heart of corporate power, causing a Category 5 disaster. She was the one who lit the match, and she had no idea the whole building was about to explode. Back in the boardroom, the CEO shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. The room fell into a dead, shocked silence. He didn't look at his board members. He didn't look at the merger agreement. His eyes were locked on the door, his face a mask of cold panic. He stabbed a finger at his frantic assistant. "Get me Captain Ryan of Flight 212 on the cockpit's direct sat line. Now," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Tell him he has an emergency directive. Tell him it comes directly from me. It started with a sound no one in first class ever expects to hear mid-flight. The sharp, metallic click of the cockpit door unlatching. Heads lifted. Conversations paused. Brenda, who was in the middle of presenting Mr. Peterson with his filet mignon, froze with the plate hovering in her hands. The door swung open, and Captain Ryan emerged. His face was grim, his knuckles white where he gripped the doorframe for a moment. He wasn't there to greet the passengers. He was a man on a mission, and his expression was that of someone who had just received the worst news of his life. He strode into the cabin with a purpose that radiated panic. He bypassed the front row. He ignored Mr. Peterson's questioning glance. His eyes, laser-focused and wide with a fear that was shockingly out of place on a man in his position, were locked on one person and one person only, the woman in the yellow suit in seat 2B. He walked directly to Tamika, stopping so abruptly his polished shoes squeaked on the floor. The entire first-class cabin held its breath. Brenda watched, her condescending smile completely gone, replaced by a mask of utter confusion. What was happening? She had been in control just moments ago. The captain leaned down, his voice low but laced with an urgent, desperate deference. "Ms. Allen," he began, and at the sound of her name, Brenda's blood ran cold. He knew her name. "Ms. Allen, on behalf of the entire Apex Air Corporation, and for me personally, I need to profoundly apologize. The failure in service you have experienced is unacceptable and is being addressed at the highest possible level." He swallowed hard. "Please, tell me what I can do to make this right." The power dynamic in the cabin didn't just shift. It shattered. The highest authority on the aircraft was now bowing, begging for forgiveness from the woman Brenda had deemed worthy of nothing but a cold chicken wrap. The nearby passengers stared, their mouths agape. Their silent judgment from moments before had turned into stunned, confused awe. The captain just intervened. "Is this damage control, or is it pure fear? What do you think is going through Brenda's mind right now? Tell me in the comments." Tamika looked up at the captain, her expression as calm and unreadable as a frozen lake. She held his terrified gaze for a long moment, letting the silence hang in the air. Then, her eyes shifted, moving past the captain to lock directly onto Brenda, who stood paralyzed a few feet away. Tamika's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, but it cut through the cabin like a shard of ice. "The time for making it right is over, Captain. Now we're going to talk about the consequences. To understand the captain's terror, you have to go back to that boardroom in Chicago." The CEO stood with the satellite phone pressed to his ear, the panicked voice of Captain Ryan a tiny, tinny squawk on the other end. The most powerful man in the company watched, frozen, as their leader's face grew impossibly paler. He gave his final, terse command to the captain and ended the call, his hand dropping to the table with a heavy thud. His chief financial officer was the first to speak, his voice trembling with fury. "David, you just halted a $10 billion merger over a customer service issue. You better have a damn good reason." The CEO, David Morrison, looked at the faces around the table, faces of men who thought they understood power, who measured it in stock points and market share. He let out a hollow, humorless laugh. "A customer service issue," he repeated, his voice shaking. "The passenger our crew decided to humiliate is named Tamika Allen." The name met with blank stares. It meant nothing to them. David leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished wood. "She's the CEO of Allen Equity Partners." A flicker of recognition. Allen Equity was a major player, a private equity giant known for its aggressive, strategic takeovers. The CFO shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Last Tuesday," David continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "Allen Equity signed a new corporate travel contract with us. It's worth $300 million. It is now our single largest account." A collective gasp went through the room. $300 million. The air grew thick with the smell of panic. "And that," David said, his eyes wild, "isn't even the worst part." He let the silence stretch, twisting the knife. "Her firm is the primary private holder of our third-quarter corporate debt. She can trigger a margin call that would cripple our ability to finance this merger." He finally looked at all of them, the full weight of the catastrophe clear in his eyes. Tamika Allen doesn't just fly with Apex Air, he said, his voice cracking. In a way, she owns us. The silence that followed was absolute. The $10 billion mojo was forgotten. All that mattered now was the woman in seat 2B. Finally, the CFO spoke, his voice hoarse. What are your orders? David's gaze snapped to his chief of operations. The fear was gone, replaced by cold, ruthless damage control. That plane lands at O'Hare in 4 to 5 minutes. I want you at the gate. You will board that aircraft before any passenger gets off. Find the lead flight attendant. Her name is Brenda Jenkins, and you will terminate her employment. On the spot. The descent into Chicago was a slow, agonizing fall through a thick blanket of clouds and an even thicker blanket of silence. After the captain's panicked apology, Brenda had retreated to the galley, her mind a frantic, replaying loop of the last 30 minutes. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. A powerful person had been inconvenienced, and the captain was overreacting to protect his own career. That had to be it. With trembling hands, she began polishing glasses that were already clean, clinging to the familiar routine as the world tilted beneath her feet. In the main cabin, Mr. Peterson stared at his untouched filet mignon as if it had personally betrayed him. The other passengers spoke in low, nervous whispers, stealing glances at Tamika, who sat with a regal calm, looking out the window as the lights of a city spread out below like a diamond net. This wasn't just any city, it was her city. She was returning to her throne. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, the rumble of the wheels on the tarmac a drumbeat counting down the final seconds of Brenda's career. The aircraft came to a smooth stop at the gate, the engines winding down into silence. Every passenger instinctively reached for their seat belt buckle, their bodies tensing for that familiar bing that would release them. It never came. The cabin remained sealed. The seatbelt lights stayed stubbornly illuminated. A full minute passed. Confused murmurs began to ripple through the plane. Then, the main cabin door hissed open with an unusual urgency. A grim-faced man in a tailored suit, his expression like carved stone, stepped onto the aircraft. He was Marcus Thorne, Apex Air's chief of operations, a man known for his ruthless efficiency. He was not here to welcome passengers. He was here to excise a tumor. He strode purposefully down the aisle, his presence sucking the remaining air out of the cabin. He ignored the confused looks, his eyes fixed on his target. He stopped at Tamika's seat, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of profound respect that made the onlookers gasp. Ms. Allen, the executive said, his voice calm and clear. I am Marcus Thorne. On behalf of CEO David Morrison and the entire Apex Air executive team, please accept our deepest apologies. Your experience on this flight was a complete failure of our standards. A car is waiting for you on the tarmac. I am here to personally ensure this situation is rectified. He then turned, his body pivoting with military precision. His gaze fell upon Brenda, who had emerged from the galley, her face a mess of confusion and dawning dread. The deference in his expression vanished, replaced by a cold, impersonal authority. His voice, now several decibels louder, was meant to be heard. It was a corporate proclamation, a public execution. Brenda Jenkins, he stated, not asking. You and your entire lead crew are grounded, effective immediately. Your access to all Apex A facilities is revoked. Surrender your credentials and your ID badges to me. Now, you will be escorted from the premises. He fired them on the spot, in front of everyone. The humiliation Brenda had inflicted on Tamika was now returned to her, tenfold, under the cold, sterile lights of the cabin she thought she ruled. The other flight attendant gasped, a hand flying to her mouth as she realized her fate was sealed, too. Some passengers gasped. Others looked away, their discomfort palpable. Justice, when it arrives, is not always polite. Comment justice down below if you believe they got exactly what they deserved. Brenda's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Grounded, her whole crew, over a meal service complaint. It didn't add up. She looked from the executive's merciless face to Tamika's serene, unreadable expression. There was a missing piece, a catastrophic miscalculation she couldn't comprehend. Finally, she found her voice, a weak, trembling whisper that was barely audible in the dead silence of the cabin. On what grounds? Brenda's question, on what grounds, hung in the dead air of the cabin, a fragile thread of defiance against the corporate guillotine. It was the last gasp of a reality she was desperately trying to hold together, a world governed by the procedures she knew, by the hierarchy she enforced. In her mind, she was a manager handling a complaint. She still had no idea she was a foot soldier who had just insulted the general of the opposing army. Marcus Thorne, the chief of operations, took a deliberate step closer. He was a predator closing the final distance. He looked down at her not with anger, but with a chilling, detached pity that was somehow worse. He was an executioner, and her question was merely a final, pointless formality before the blade fell. His voice was cold steel, each word carefully enunciated to be heard not just by her, but by every passenger who had witnessed her earlier performance of power. On the grounds of gross insubordination, he began, his voice a low, brutal hum. On the grounds of a catastrophic failure to adhere to the company's core principles of client respect. He paused, letting the corporate jargon twist like a knife. Specifically, on the grounds of disrespecting Ms. Tamika Allen, he let her name hang in the air for a beat, a name he knew meant nothing to Brenda yet. He then delivered the kill shot. The chief executive officer of Allen Equity Partners and our new premier corporate partner. The title detonated in the cabin. It was a sonic boom of status and power that shattered the quiet. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, sucked the air from the front rows. On the other side of the aisle, Mr. Peterson, the man with the filet mignon, physically recoiled as if the words themselves had struck him. His face went from confused to horrified to a deep, mortified crimson. He stared at the half-eaten steak on his tray, a symbol of his petty privilege, and it suddenly looked grotesque. He had been a willing participant in the humiliation of a woman who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. He wasn't just a witness. He was an accomplice, and he suddenly felt the terrifying weight of that complicity. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Allen Equity. The Tamika Allen. A man in row 2 frantically typed her name into his phone, his eyes widening in disbelief as the search results populated. The truth was spreading through the cabin now, a digital wave of confirmation that turned the scene from a firing into a legend. But for Brenda, the impact was a complete system failure. The name and title crashed through her consciousness, shredding every assumption, every prejudice, every petty judgment she had made. The pieces of a catastrophic mistake began to slam together in her mind with the force of a multi-car pileup. The woman in the bright yellow suit, the one she had judged as ghetto the moment she saw her. The shaved head she had seen as unprofessional. The quiet, firm request for a meal she had arrogantly dismissed as entitlement. The condescending offer of a cold wrap. The smug satisfaction she had felt in putting her in her place. Every single decision, every dismissive glance, every condescending word was now replaying in her mind. But this time, it was lit by the horrifying, billion-dollar glow of the truth. Her entire worldview, a fragile construct built on snap judgments and the authority of a uniform, was shattering. Her mind flashed forward, seeing her future with sickening clarity, the humiliating escort off the plane, the termination paperwork, the black mark on her record that would make her untouchable in the industry. She had built her entire identity on this job, on the sliver of power it gave her. And in a single, ignorant moment, she had burned it all to the ground. She looked past the executive, her eyes pleading, searching for Tamika. But Tamika Allen was not looking at her. In the midst of the chaos she had unleashed, she remained an island of perfect, regal calm. Then, with a quiet, deliberate grace, she did something that stunned everyone. She reached down and, with a soft click, unbuckled her seatbelt. The illuminated sign above her head still demanded she stay seated, but Tamika was done following the rules of a system that had failed her. She turned, not to Brenda, but to the other, younger flight attendant who stood frozen in terror. "I believe I was promised a glass of water," Tamika said, her voice even and calm. It was the ultimate dismissal, an act of power so profound it rendered Brenda and the executive and the entire drama utterly irrelevant. This wasn't a victory she needed to gloat over. It was simply an obstacle that had been removed. She was already moving on. The quiet command snapped Thorne back to the task at hand. He turned his merciless gaze back to Brenda, who was now trembling, her face a pale, tear-streaked ruin. "Your credentials," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now!" With numb, fumbling fingers, she unclipped the plastic ID badge that had been the source of her pride. As she handed the flimsy card, her name and title now utterly meaningless, to the executive, a passenger in row 3 lowered his phone. The click of the record button stopping was almost audible. The video was uploading before Brenda's badge was even in Thorne's hand. What happened on Flight 212 was no longer a corporate incident. It was about to become a global headline. The video hit the internet like a lightning strike. Before Flight 212 had even finished deplaning, the shaky cell phone footage of Marcus Thorne publicly firing Brenda Jenkins was already ricocheting across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The hashtag #ApexRacism exploded, trending worldwide in under an hour. News outlets picked it up, replaying the key moments in an endless loop. Brenda's condescending dismissal, the executive's cold pronouncement, and the stoic, powerful presence of the unknown woman in the yellow suit, who was quickly dubbed the CEO in 2B. The consequences were no longer personal. They were brutally professional, financial, and public. Back at Apex Air headquarters, the boardroom had transformed into a crisis war room. The billion-dollar merger was dead. Now, it was about survival. A bank of screens on one wall showed the nightmare in real time. The cascading waterfall of angry news headlines, the flood of vitriolic social media comments, and the most painful image of all, the Apex Air stock ticker, plunging downward in a sea of red. Every percentage point represented millions of dollars in value, evaporating into thin air because of a cold chicken wrap and a lifetime of unchecked prejudice. An emergency internal investigation was launched immediately, but it wasn't about finding the truth. The truth was already the #1 trending topic on the planet. This was about damage control. It was a frantic search for a narrative that could save the brand. And in Brenda Jenkins' personnel file, they found the ammunition they needed. The records revealed something shocking, something that turned the incident from a single, terrible mistake into a portrait of systemic failure. This wasn't Brenda's first offense. It was her third. 2 other official complaints had been filed against her in the last 5 years, both from black passengers, both detailing racially biased behavior and dismissive treatment. Both had been quietly resolved by HR with a written warning and a mandatory online sensitivity training module she had clearly just clicked through. The company hadn't just employed a racist, they had protected one. This discovery sealed her fate. The swift, public firing was now not just a reaction, but a necessity. It was their only defense. Of course, when this detail leaked, it sparked a whole new firestorm online. Some say firing her was the only possible option for a pattern of racist behavior. Others called it a corporation throwing an employee to the wolves to save themselves, screaming about cancel culture. Where do you stand on this? Was this justice, or was it just a PR move? As the day closed, CEO David Morrison stood alone in his office, watching the stock price flatline at a 12% loss, a valuation drop of nearly $500 million. The brand was toxic. The federal aviation authorities were opening an inquiry. Brenda Jenkins was just the first casualty. He knew this fire was still burning, and there was only one person on Earth who could put it out. He picked up his phone and spoke to his assistant. "Get me a meeting with Tamika Allen, first thing tomorrow, and have legal draw up a settlement offer. Start with 8 figures and a non-disclosure agreement." He thought he could buy his way out of the crisis. He believed a big enough check could make this all go away. He had no idea that Tamika Allen wasn't interested in his money. She was coming for his power. The meeting was set on his turf, the main boardroom at Apex Air headquarters, the same room where he had nearly finalized a $10 billion merger just the day before. CEO David Morrison felt the ghost of that failed deal lingering in the air. He sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, flanked by a team of 3 of the most expensive corporate lawyers in Chicago. In front of him was a leather-bound folder containing a settlement agreement. The lead lawyer had assured him the number inside, a staggering $10 million, was more than enough to buy silence and make this nightmare go away. David was sweating. He was about to perform the most expensive apology of his life. The door opened, and Tamika Allen walked in. She was not flanked by lawyers. She was alone. She wore a sharp, navy blue suit, her presence filling the room with an authority that made David's team of legal sharks look like minnows. She didn't wait to be offered a seat. She took the one directly opposite him, placing a slim tablet on the table before her. The visual was stark, his army of 3, and her, a party of 1. It was not an equal negotiation. David cleared his throat and began, his voice strained as he recited the carefully rehearsed apology. He spoke of the company's deep regret, of their commitment to excellence, of the incident being an anomaly. Tamika listened with an unnerving stillness, her face revealing nothing. Finally, he slid the folder across the table. "Ms. Allen," he said, trying to sound magnanimous, "in recognition of the profound failure in your experience with us, we are prepared to offer you a personal settlement of $10 million, along with a $5 million donation to a charity of your choice. All we ask is a standard non-disclosure agreement." Tamika didn't even open the folder. She looked from the expensive leather to his face, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion showed in her eyes, disappointment. "I'm not interested in your money, David," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The lawyers shifted, confused. David was stunned into silence. Hush money was the language of corporate crisis. It was the only language he knew. To have it refused so completely, so easily, was like having his tongue cut out. Tamika tapped her tablet, and the screen came to life. "This was never about money," she continued. "This was about a corporate culture so broken that your employees feel empowered to humiliate black customers with impunity. Your check doesn't fix that. It just hides it. I'm not here for settlement. I'm here to dictate the terms of your company's survival." She laid out her plan, not as a request, but as a series of non-negotiable directives. First, a complete and total overhaul of all diversity, equity, and inclusion training, from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. The new program would be designed and implemented by a firm of her choosing, at Apex's expense. Second, a new, zero-tolerance policy for any act of discrimination, to be enforced not by HR, but by a new, independent civilian oversight board. She would have a hand in selecting the board's members. And third, the establishment of the Tamika Allen Aviation Scholarship, a $50 million, 10-year fund dedicated to supporting black students who want to become pilots, aviation engineers, and airline executives. When she finished, she turned the screen off. The room was utterly silent. David and his lawyers stared at her, their faces pale with shock. They had come prepared for a lawsuit, for a negotiation. They were completely unprepared for a reformation. One of the lawyers finally found his voice, stammering, "Ms. Allen, these terms are unprecedented." "The cost." Tamika cut him off, not with a word, but with a look so cold it froze the objection in his throat. She then turned her gaze back to the CEO. "These are not demands, David. They are the price of my firm's $300 million contract, the price of our continued confidence in your corporate debt, and the price of my silence. You have 24 hours to sign the agreement my office will be sending over." She stood up, her part in the meeting finished. "Your stock has already dropped 12%. I wonder what it will do tomorrow if the world finds out you refuse to fix the problem." The 24 hours Tamika had given them were the longest in the history of Apex. In the boardroom, a war was waged. The lawyers screamed about the precedent it would set. The CFO ran models showing the astronomical cost, and the board of directors debated the terrifying overreach of power. But David Morrison, the CEO, just kept pointing to the screen showing the stock price, which had started to bleed again on rumors that the company was refusing to cooperate with Tamika Allen. They were cornered, and they knew it. The choice was between unprecedented demands and corporate extinction. Shortly before the deadline, a single, signed PDF was emailed to Tamika's office. The surrender was unconditional. What followed was a swift and public display of capitulation. Apex Air issued a formal apology, but this was unlike any corporate statement the world had seen before. It didn't use vague language like "we fell short of our values." At Tamika's insistence, it was brutally specific. It publicly announced the establishment of a new, independent oversight board to review all discrimination complaints. It detailed the creation of the $50 million Tamika Allen Aviation Scholarship for aspiring black professionals. And it committed to a complete, top-to-bottom overhaul of its D&I training, to be led by a world-renowned firm that Tamika herself had selected. The company was not just apologizing for its sins, it was publicly listing the penance it was forced to pay. Miles away, in a quiet suburban home, the final piece of personal justice was delivered. Brenda Jenkins, still reeling from her public humiliation, received a letter by special courier. It was not a letter of suspension, it was a formal termination notice. The letter was cold and clinical. It stated that due to the findings of an internal investigation, which had confirmed a pattern of behavior in violation of company policy, her employment was terminated, effective immediately. The system she had weaponized, the rules she had hidden behind, had finally been turned against her. The system she represented now held her fully accountable. Justice wasn't just about Brenda losing her job. That was a consequence. True justice was in the foundation of the change she had inadvertently caused. It was in the endowed scholarship that would open doors for generations to come. It was in the new rules that would protect future passengers from the same humiliation. Tamika hadn't just gotten one person fired. She had begun the long, arduous process of transforming an entire corporate culture. She had won. The battle was over. She had faced down a corporate giant and forced it to its knees, demanding that it become better. But her victory, broadcast across every news channel and social media platform, came with an unintended consequence she was not prepared for. It had turned her from a private, powerful CEO into a very public, very potent symbol. And being a symbol means your story is no longer entirely your own. In the months that followed, the story of Flight 212 evolved. It stopped being just a news story and became a modern corporate legend. Business schools wrote case studies about it. Diversity consultants used it as the ultimate example of the real-world cost of unchecked bias. On LinkedIn, it became a viral parable, a modern-day David and Goliath story retold in countless motivational posts. The CEO in 2B became a shorthand, a meme, a warning. The phrase, "Don't pull a Brenda Jenkins," entered the corporate lexicon, a reminder to every frontline employee that the person you dismiss might just be the one who signs the checks. The story became a cautionary tale, whispered in the boardrooms of the very companies that had once looked down on women like Tamika. For them, the lesson wasn't just about morality, it was about risk. Prejudice, they were suddenly realizing, was a catastrophic liability. A single act of disrespect had cost Apex Air $500 million, a multimillion-dollar reform package, and a permanent stain on its brand. That was a language they understood. And at the center of it all was Tamika Allen. Her quiet, dignified refusal to be erased had turned her into an icon. She was on the cover of Forbes and featured in profiles about the new face of power. She was invited to speak at global leadership summits, not just as a CEO, but as a symbol of grace and strength. She had wanted to force a system to change, and she had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. This story proves that one person's refusal to be silenced can create waves. It's a reminder for all of us that our dignity is non-negotiable. Tamika had become a legend, a powerful, untouchable symbol of justice served. But the thing about becoming a legend is that people forget you are still a person. One evening, months after the media storm had quieted, a single, hand-addressed envelope arrived at her private office, bypassing the usual corporate mailroom. It was forwarded from her old family home in Alabama. There was no return address. She opened it, intrigued. The letter inside was a single page, and as her eyes scanned to the bottom, she saw the signature, written in a looping, slightly old-fashioned script. Her blood ran cold. It was from Brenda. Tamika held the letter in her hands for a long time. The paper felt thin and fragile, a stark contrast to the corporate weight of the legal documents and contracts that usually crossed her desk. This was personal, an echo from a battle she had already won, a voice from a life she had already dismantled. Her first instinct was to throw it away, to not let the poison of that day touch her again. But curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, made her slide a letter opener under the seal. The letter inside was short, the looping handwriting covering less than a single page. As Tamika read, the Ice Queen persona she had adopted as a public symbol began to melt away, replaced by a profound and complicated stillness. The words were not what she expected. There were no excuses, no pleas for help. There was only a raw, unvarnished accounting of a life that had been broken apart. Brenda wrote that she was unemployed, humbled, and that losing the career she had built her identity around had forced her to look at the person she had become. She wrote about going to counseling, about being forced to confront the ugly, casual prejudice she had carried inside her for years, a prejudice she had never even recognized until it had cost her everything. The letter was a sincere, unconditional apology. Brenda expressed a deep and profound remorse, not just for her actions, but for the racial animus behind them. She wrote that the memory of Tamika's face in that moment of public humiliation haunted her, and that she finally understood the profound and violent impact of what she had done. Tamika finished the letter and leaned back in her chair, the silence of her office feeling heavy around her. Justice had been served. The system had been changed. The story, from the world's perspective, was over. But this letter, this was something else. This was not a consequence she had engineered. This was an offer of grace, extended from the person who had the least right to ask for any. Most people would have thrown the letter in the trash, satisfied. But Tamika Allen wasn't most people. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over her assistant's number. What do you do when your enemy apologizes? What do you do when the villain of your story reveals themselves to be simply a broken human being? She pressed the button. "Clear my schedule for next Friday," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "and book me a flight." The interview was a global leadership summit, broadcast live to millions. Tamika Allen sat opposite a famous journalist known for her sharp, incisive questions. They had talked about market strategies and billion-dollar deals. Then, the journalist leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "Ms. Allen," she said, her voice cutting through the polite applause, "the world knows the story of Flight 212. Your supporters call it a landmark moment of justice. Your critics call it a brutal act of corporate revenge that destroyed a woman's life. Which is it?" A hush fell over the massive auditorium. It was a direct challenge, a demand for a justification. The world wanted to hear the victor gloat. Tamika offered a small, knowing smile. "I don't believe in revenge," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I believe in accountability, and I believe in education." She let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the first shock. "That's why, several months ago, I flew to meet with Brenda Jenkins in person." A wave of stunned murmurs rippled through the audience. The journalist was visibly thrown, her follow-up question dying on her lips. Meeting your enemy was one thing, but the woman who had publicly humiliated you? It was unthinkable. Tamika waited for the shock to subside before she continued. "Our culture is very good at cancellation. We tear people down, we take their jobs, and we call it justice. And sometimes, it is. But what happens the day after? What is the purpose of justice if not to build a better world? Forgiveness without action is just an empty word." "Real change," Tamika said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned audience, "requires work." She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly, drawing every person in the room into an intimate confidence. "So I made her an offer. I told her that if her remorse was real, she had to prove it. She had to do the work." Then came the reveal, a twist so stunning it felt like a physical blow. "For the last 6 months," Tamika stated, her voice clear and precise, "the lead instructor for Apex Air's new empathy training program, the one my firm funded, has been Brenda Jenkins." Absolute, dumbfounded silence. The murmurs died. The air crackled. The journalist's mouth was agape, utterly speechless. Then, a collective gasp, a sound of thousands of people having the entire narrative of the past year flipped upside down in a single sentence. The villain of the story wasn't just forgiven. She had been conscripted. Before the chaos of questions could erupt, Tamika explained. Who better to teach the real-world cost of prejudice than someone who lost everything to it? Who better to explain the blind spots of a broken system than someone who operated within it? Her story is now the most powerful tool for change Apex Air has. That, to me, is the definition of restorative justice. It was her final, most powerful move. She had taken a story of revenge and transformed it into a lesson on profound empathy and radical strategy. She had already forced a corporation to change its rules. Now, she was challenging the world to change its heart. 2 years later, in a brightly lit training center at Apex Air's Chicago headquarters, a new class of flight attendants sat listening to an instructor. They were the most diverse group the airline had ever recruited. The instructor was not a corporate trainer with a PowerPoint presentation. She was a woman in her late 50s with tired but knowing eyes, and she was telling them a story about the worst day of her life. Her name was Brenda Jenkins, and her story about the real-world cost of a single, prejudiced assumption held the room in a silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. This was part of the new training program. This was restorative justice in action. But Tamika's true legacy wasn't in that classroom. It was thousands of feet higher. Her name was Maya. She was 24 years old, the daughter of a mechanic from the south side of Chicago, and she was the first ever recipient of the Tamika Allen Aviation Scholarship. The scholarship hadn't just paid for her flight school. It had given her a chance that her world had never offered before. She had graduated at the top of her class, and today, she was sitting in the co-pilot seat of a brand new Apex Air jet, the city of Chicago sprawling beneath her as she went through the pre-flight checklist. Her hands, steady and sure, moved across the complex array of instruments and controls. She looked out the wide cockpit window at the endless expanse of blue sky waiting for her. Her dream, a dream that had been built on a foundation she knew nothing about, a foundation of humiliation, of quiet strength, of a single act of defiance in the face of disrespect. She was a direct result of a cold chicken wrap, an arrogant dismissal, and a woman who refused to be erased. Tamika Allen's legacy wasn't just in the rules she had rewritten or the money she had invested. It was here, in the quiet confidence of a young black woman taking her place at the controls, breaking a barrier that had been invisible and unshakable for generations. Tamika's war wasn't just about winning a single battle on a single flight. It was about ensuring that future generations would never have to fight it again. As the captain gave her a nod and the tower cleared them for takeoff, Maya placed her hands on the throttle. The engines roared to life. A new era was taking flight. And that's how a single act of prejudice in first class created a new standard for an entire industry. Because sometimes, to make the system fly right, you first have to ground it. The system changed because one woman had the power to make it. But that leaves us with one final, haunting question. What happens when the person being humiliated doesn't own the airline? Who speaks for them? If you believe every person's dignity matters, whether they are a CEO or not, then help us tell their stories. Like this video to stand for respect. Share it to start a conversation. And subscribe to join our movement, ensuring that no voice is ever silenced again.